Summerlee Foundation was the creation of a Dallas lady by the name of Annie Lee Roberts. She loved history and she loved animals, and especially Texas history and protection of animals and prevention of cruelty to animals. Annie Lee Warren, her maiden name, was born in Terrell, Texas, about 1895. Her husband, Summerfield Griffith Roberts, was born in Terrell also in 1891. They had known each other and were very distantly related. Both were fifth-generation Texans and certainly very proud of that. And they married in 1920 and moved to Dallas and lived in Highland Park for several years, ultimately moving to their home at Hunters Glen in 1948 at University Park.
I approached Mrs. Roberts and I said, you've got to have somebody on your board of this foundation that has an interest in animals. And David said to me, well, find somebody then.
So we began a search for a person knowledgeable in the animal issues and a search for a person knowledgeable in history issues. And luckily, we were able to find two of the finest people that Mrs. Roberts admired greatly to join our board. One, Melanie Roberts, not related but had the same name Roberts, on the animal side, and John Crane, the director of the Dallas Historical Society, on the Texas history side.
I knew the field of Texas history very well when Mrs. Roberts established the foundation. One of the main goals, of course, was Texas history, and they wanted someone on the board who knew the field. Now, Judge Jackson, of course, knew the field pretty well as well, but as director of the Texas State Historical Association at that time, I was acquainted on a statewide basis. I think we were very fortunate to be able to get John Crane to join the board at a fairly early stage, because my presence on the board was specifically to provide some Texas history expertise and guidance.
I left the Dallas Historical Society, took the post as the executive director of the Summerlee Commission, and we officed with the foundation on Douglas, which is just a block away. And it was there that I got to know all the people involved with cerebral oil as well as the foundation, and really got to know the folks who really are responsible for building Summerlee. This is David Jackson and Melanie Lambert. They're really the builders, along with Ron Tyler, who was an early director.
Mrs. Roberts wanted to help animals throughout the world. She wanted to help animals that were particularly abused and exploited. Animals in circuses, rodeos, zoos, aquaria. She was horrified at what was happening throughout the world, slaughter of animals, taking wildlife and using these animals in entertainment. She believed strongly in sanctuary, helping these animals recover and sending them through rehabilitation, release if possible. If not, then a decent place for them to live. Anywhere there was animal cruelty, anywhere there was mistreatment, she wanted to help. There were things that she experienced and saw when she was a child that greatly influenced her. She told me a story about when she was little, and her father leased land in East Texas for the traveling circus. And when Mrs. Roberts, when Annie Lee was a child, she would go down to watch the traveling circus unload. And that played an important role in her early views of how animals were treated. She said it was absolutely horrible. She had no idea. It greatly impacted her to see how these magnificent wild animals were housed, were treated, and were carted around the country. She also told me a story about a farmer. She saw a farmer out in his field with his plow horse, and the horse was struggling and had stopped and couldn't really go any further, and the farmer was beating the horse. He had a whip, he was beating the horse. And Mrs. Roberts, as a child, climbed over the fence, marched out into the middle of the field, and begged the farmer to quit beating that horse. You know, that's extraordinary for a woman, you know, in that era as a little girl to have that strength. Everything about Mrs. Roberts was a kindness. She had a kind demeanor. She was passionate about issues, compassionate. She was one of the gentlest, kindest people I've ever known. And as soon as you met her, you felt that. She had a broad knowledge and wisdom of the animal issues.
On the Texas history side, a lot of it was driven from the interest that her deceased husband, Summerfield G. Roberts, had in Texas history.
One of the things on the history side, where I'm most active, is that we're more involved with the state and municipalities today than ever before, because we've found that the state of Texas has its fingers into so many different programs in preservation and history that there are ways we can basically leverage our funds by working with the state and working with city governments and county governments that we can't do very well with the private nonprofit groups. So we see a lot of opportunities working with government. And so surprisingly, we're seeing more of our dollars going into collaborative programs with government.
One of the major goals which Mrs. Roberts wanted, and we all wanted, was participation in the new Handbook of Texas, which is a wonderful encyclopedia of Texas history, which has, it's over 3,000 pages of knowledge accumulated from research and study by Texas historians, and it was made available in an expanded form in the year 1994 as a result of the research and funding that we gave to that project.
The animal grant-making world is fairly small, unfortunately. And when I began, again about 20 years ago, there were a few foundations nationally. There probably were some small funds in community foundations, but at that time I wasn't aware of them. And so there were only a few of us, perhaps even a handful of us, who were addressing animal protection, funding for animal protection on a national level. Today, there are quite a few more, and in fact, we help create and belong to an affinity group of animal grant makers, and there are currently about 28 members, and we've been putting together a database of about 45 foundations across the country and in Mexico and Canada who give substantially for animal protection. So it's grown, and as Summerlee was created in 1989, it was right on the cusp of other foundations being created, animal issues coming into their own, especially wildlife habitat protection, the environmental movement, the animal protection movement seemed to grow. And we're really pleased that Summerlee could play a role in that and be one of the pioneering foundations in this arena. So it truly has expanded, which can only be a good thing for animals.
I think one of the exciting things that makes the Summerlee Foundation different than many other foundations is that we are really proactive in numerous areas, proactive in getting current issues established, and we call those strategic initiatives. We will look into an issue, and if it becomes an important issue that people need to know about, we will publicize it by having conferences and meetings and educational activities.
I just want to contribute what I can to Mrs. Roberts' memory and to her goodwill and to her interest in animals. The more she learned about them, the more she would help. And so that's the kind of person she was.
I think anybody who's interested in the field of Texas history now generally thinks of the Summerlee Foundation first when they think of trying to get support for a Texas history project. We have the reputation of being not only a foundation that might be able to get you started if you have a good idea. I also think that a Summerlee Foundation grant is sort of a badge of good conduct, if you will. I think organizations that receive our grants can go to other individuals and organizations and show them that they've received a grant from the Summerlee Foundation, and I think that automatically provides confidence for the next donor.
Well, I would say that it's been a lot of hard work to climb that mountain. Melanie Lambert and I have taken leadership roles in a number of institutions in this state as well as other states, and I think those connections will pay off greatly.
The future is going to be challenging, as it always is. The animal movement is ever fluid, ever changing. There are new issues all the time. I know Mrs. Roberts recognized that, and it was so clear that she had a commitment to making changes, but she also recognized that it would always be an enormous challenge.
One thing that is critical is that we keep donor intent in mind, that we basically observe the mission statement of Mrs. Roberts, what she wanted the foundation to do, and I think everyone on our board currently is committed to that.
So I feel very comfortable that we have carried out Mrs. Roberts' love of animals and love of Texas history in the creation and operation of the Summerlee Foundation.